Okay, so let's take a few moments and dive into qualitative research. So, when you're analyzing your data, or rather the responses of your participants, you're in a constant analysis process. A little bit different than quantitative because you collect your data, and then at the end of your data collection, you simply plug in the numbers to SPSS, or you simply calculate the percentages or look at the frequency of the responses, and then you generate your analysis. Whereas with a qualitative research component or a study, the analysis is ongoing throughout your entire project, and we call that interim analysis. Another important component to qualitative research is memoing. And what that is simply is creating memos. These are notes that you're using throughout your project. There are 4 functions of memoing. The first one is it maps your research activities. So what decisions were made during the research? Did the research change direction? And if so, what circumstances led to this? The second function of memoing is that it establishes the meaning of the data. What are the similarities and differences with the data? And are there relationships occurring with the data? And what hypotheses can be generated from the data that you have obtained? The 2 other functions are relatively self-explanatory. So when you are memoing, you are actually propelling the research forward, and it allows for maintenance of open communication among the research team. So let's go on a qualitative research journey. For example, if I'm going to interview a group of people who all smoke and they are wanting to stop smoking, or perhaps they're just interested in learning more about smoking cessation, and finally, or they could be smokers that have no outlook on wanting to change their behavior, but they just wanted to participate in the study. So the first thing that you're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to bring my fieldwork journal with me when I go to interview the participants. And the purpose of the fieldwork journal is to keep track of my notes. It allows me to basically analyze the responses as we go, and it also provides an opportunity for me to practice reflexivity, which is taking a step back and thinking about my participants, the way that they answer the questions, their desire to want to be there. Perhaps they look at this as an opportunity to help others, looking at their demeanor, and also the overall kind of responses that they're giving. So it's important to keep that fieldwork journal. Once I have the responses, I'm going to do what's called segmenting. And basically what this is reviewing all of those little analytical units, reviewing the responses, the data that has been collected and transcribed. And once I've done this, then I need to code my data. Now, if I am using a similar study that has already been done, but I want to replicate this and maybe take it a different direction, perhaps there were codes that have already been established. And we call those a priori codes. However, if this is relatively new research, it hasn't been done before, this is groundbreaking, then I need to make my own codes. And so that would be considered inductive codes. And these inductive codes are based on the data that I have personally collected, essentially making this my own research and my own coding system. Once I have established the codes, then I put them into a code book. So everything, the categories, if you will, are going to be collected and placed into this code book. And intracoder and intercoder reliability really come into play when I'm using other coders or other researchers to help me. So if they're gathering data Intra-coder reliability means that each individual coder codes all of the data consistently. And inter-coder reliability means that among the group of coders, the coding process is occurring consistently. So in the purpose of your DMP project, you are probably going to be the only coder. So the intra-coder and inter-coder may not pertain to you at this point. But additional research that you do outside of your DNP with a collaboration of other people, you might have more than one coders, and so that's where this reliability will come into play. So looking at a narrative analysis, we're looking at patterns specifically. So as we gather our information from each of the interviewees in our research project, we're looking for specific patterns. These could be patterns of behavior as people are answering the questions. Maybe there were questions that were a little sensitive, so in your journal, you're going to kind of make notes about that. Just the facial expressions, perhaps the hesitancy in answering the questions, and then, of course, the responses themselves. Once you've established patterns, then you start to develop themes. And themes really are it's sort of the reoccurrence of these experiences, the reoccurrence of responses from your participants specifically. So once we have looked at the patterns, developed our themes, now we're moving on to the thematic networks analysis. And there are three components specifically. It's the basic, the organizing, and the global themes. So our basic themes, this is the lowest order. It can be derived from the responses from our participants. It's a simple idea, characteristic of their responses. Then what we do is we start looking at these basic themes and start putting them into groups. So we're organizing the basic themes into specific groups. Once we have these groups then, now we can start looking at the big picture. That's the global theme. So if we're using our example of our research group of smokers, our basic theme might be the very specific answers from each participant. And then what we do is we start to extrapolate themes that are consistent among all of the participants. And then we begin to, organize those responses. And then we start to, like I said, take a step back and look at the full picture. What is the majority of what they're talking about? So if it's, for instance, if there's a big barrier to stop smoking because insurance doesn't pay for smoking cessation programs, I'm just throwing it out there. I'm sure a lot of them do, but I do know of a few people that's a barrier for. Then we need to look at that global theme of, policy level. Okay, maybe changing the policy so insurance companies must provide some kind of financial considerations or reimbursement for people who want to try to stop smoking. Okay, so let's move on then to the steps of creating thematic networks. So say, for instance, one of my questions is, why do you continue to smoke? And I might have several participants say because it's a stress reliever, because they're afraid that maybe they can't stop smoking, or they have tried to stop smoking in the past, but they weren't able to kick the habit. Perhaps they like the social engagement that it gives them. And then maybe you have one person out there that answers that, well, it reminds him of his younger days and his papa used to smoke. Well, that's probably going to be just the one and only response like that you're going to get. So that is an example of reducing the data. The other ones, more than one person might actually say that. So you want to keep that data, but you want to get rid of the data that is just kind of an outlier, if you will. Then we're going to start identifying the specific themes, the barriers, the reasons why people like to smoke. the reasons that they're afraid to quit. All right. And then you're going to arrange those themes and start describing the networks. How do each one of these more or less connect to one another? And then we're going to summarize the networks and the themes. And this summary basically helps us conceptualize the full picture. And once we can do that, now we're ready to compile our deductions that we've made and also look at the relevant theories behind the themes and the patterns that basically come through with the responses from the participants. So for example, if someone says that they have tried, or several people have said they have tried in the past, they're just not sure, they have it in themselves to try again to quit. Well, this might be along the lines of self-efficacy. Perhaps they have a low self-efficacy that they won't be able to stop smoking. So you can certainly look at Bandura's social cognitive theory and pull out that construct of self-efficacy and use that as your framework. Another example is if you have several participants say, you know what, I actually did start looking at smoking cessation programs, and through that you can determine that they are in the contemplation stage in the stages of change model. So you could certainly use the stages of change model as a foundational precept for your research. So I hope this makes sense to you. The next step after you've done all of this and you've compiled your data and you've analyzed the data, both if you're doing a qualitative, quantitative, or perhaps the mixed methods, the next step is just to write that paper. So I hope you found this to be informational. I apologize that it's very quick and rushed. Unfortunately, we only get 15 minutes of recording time with our free applications that we have afforded to us. So I just wanted to extend that if you have any specific questions about qualitative or quantitative analysis, please do not hesitate to ask me or your chair of your project. So thank you, and I'll talk to you later.